Welcome, everybody, to the Jake Feinberg Show, special edition from New Suffolk, New York. And I'm joined today by a musician, composer, arranger, accompanist, accordionist.
Also.
I just witnessed Concerts by the Sea, Concerts by the Bay, Gil Goldstein 4th of July celebration. Great version of the song, Paul Simon's version of America, with a great band, and it's really a thrill for my audience. Is just for point of reference, when I was going to Boston University and I was a fledgling broadcaster doing radio, I had a radio show called Wrapped in the Cloud, based on an album that Gil did at least it was released in 1980 with Danny Gottlieb, Mark Egan, and Steve Swallow. He's always been one of my favorite guys, and it's been great to get to know him personally. Gil Goldstein, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. Nice to see you here.
It's great to be here. I had to ask you originally, going back to your you grew up in Baltimore?
Yeah.
What was it? Was it a very segregated area when you grew up?
I guess it was pretty segregated. You know, there's some pictures right over there of my life. That's me as a little fledgling. This is not helping our radio audience.
No, it's fine.
You see, mostly it's a segregated kind of scene. But you know, I had a very good a housekeeper that worked with us named Dorothy Stills, and she was with me most of my life. And I remember like kind of checking out a lot of music through her. She would play like some records in the house sometimes. And my mother was kind of a jazz fan, so I was exposed to a lot of jazz music early on. She owned a jazz club actually in Washington, D.C. called the Benghazi in 1948 to 50. And so, you know, I was kind of exposed to things that took me out of, you know, a segregated zone.
Because that essentially original American music was bandstand music. I mean, it was music to make people dance. And
yeah.
You tell me how you because yeah,
but I kind of grew up. You know, my parents, although they were not musicians per se, you know, they kind of had kind of Catholic tastes in music. My father, for some reason, liked French music, and I heard a lot of really good kind of French kind of folk popular music. And you know, I heard kind of show tunes, and I remember buying you know, classical records at the supermarket. You know, I kind of got exposed to a lot of different music.
And so your ear became accustomed to listening to a wide.
Well, I did listen to a lot of music as a kid. You know.
And you started playing the accordion. Now, did your accordion at that time look anything like the one?
You can see it right there. See that me on that picture with the little black accordion, second from the left on the bottom. Oh, the other side, left. There I am.
Yes. Oh, yes.
The little black accordion.
Oh, wow. And were you the only guy? Were you the only kid to be playing that in the neighborhood?
No, everybody in my neighborhood started playing on accordions in Baltimore in the 50s. There was a TV show on television that would have like 100 kids standing around, some kind of accordion orchestra. You know, it was very popular for some reason in the 50s in Baltimore. And it was an instrument you could start your kids on, and I'm very glad I started on accordion, because it's a much better instrument to start on than starting on just piano.
Explain why.
Well, because, you know, you kind of get the sense of breath, and, you know, you can hold notes for different lengths, and it's pretty much a reed instrument, and it's almost closer to a wind instrument. You know, so you get a sense of, you know, loud and soft, and you have to coordinate left hand with right hand a little bit more than with the piano, you know, because the piano is, you know, is not such a physical instrument. The accordion you have to open and close, and you get a sense of breathing. And
it's not an instrument that is it's not the first instrument that would come to mind when it comes to when you put it in a jazz context.
You got to free your mind, boy.
Free it.
You got to free your mind because the accordion's coming on.
It's
the
coming.
accordion is going to come on. In
Yeah.
a couple of years, people are going to say, this guy used to play the saxophone. And people are going to go, what the hell was that? They won't know what it is.
The thing that I connected with you on originally, Gil, it wasn't even. It was on a total visceral is the wrong word to use, but it was like I just saw you and I said, he looks like a down to earth guy, just a regular guy, no ego. But that might have changed. But the question is, the reality is,
really,
your upbringing though. What were the value? Your parents obviously tried to instill everything they could in you. What were the things that that made sense to you that they try to instill the values that you've kept to this day?
I don't know if parents really can instill values. I know from the beginning I kind of, everybody kind of wants to be a good guy and do good and, and for some reason I was always had a thing about music and I wanted to pursue it and I knew it from kind of an early age, but I didn't know that, my parents were not great at saying, you should do this and, they just kind of let me do what I wanted to do, but I didn't know that I could make a living at music. That kind of was a conundrum for me because I said I like music, but I probably have to get a job at some point. And they didn't say, no, you should just stick with music and go to do music stuff. So I kind of tried to invent that for myself. I think most parents wouldn't even know how to advise a kid about that.
So they were also kind of cautious about. I mean, they didn't just say, Gil, go for the music scene. They're like, you have to plan for the.
They didn't say need yes or no.
Just kind of in the mid. No real no direction home, so to speak.
Well, I kind of knew I was going to go to college, and I went to college and I was studying a bunch of different liberal arts things as well as music. And then the third year of college, I kind of decided that I wanted to go to Berkeley and pursue music a little bit more. I stopped going to, I didn't want to go for a second year to Berkeley, and I said, okay, I'm coming back to Maryland and I'm going to, start playing gigs. And then my parents said, you're going to finish college, though. And I had a couple opportunities to go on the road and play, and they said, no, I think you should finish school.
At Berkeley, who was your instructor there? Who was your teacher?
My teachers were not very significant to me there.
They didn't. That's why you only stuck around for a year.
I kind of learned kind of what I needed to learn. They kind of gave me some tools that I could learn, and when I went there, there wasn't like a big crop of inspiring people. However, when I went to the university, so I went to the University of Maryland after that, then I went to the University of Miami after that, and I walked into really a beehive of, really serious influences. Pat Metheny was a student there, Mark and Danny, who played on the record that you were schlepping around in Boston, and all those guys were at college there, and I said, okay, this is a musical community. It was the first time that I was in a community where I felt like, okay, I need to learn a lot of information. I'm getting a lot of stuff from my colleagues, I really didn't have that in Boston. It was kind of, and as much as you can get a good teacher, and I teach college now, I try to impart what I think is the important information about music that I've determined over the years. But in the end, people learn from peers. They see people their own age expressing themselves, honestly, I feel a little bit at odds with my students. They go, I love this. And I go, really? And I can't help but feel a little bit like, to me that's not the greatest stuff, but that's their generation. And they tend to think that that's the thing, and that's what they're going to learn from. But I think I can give them, and I can't comment on it. Like, I had very bad teachers at the University of Miami, and generally that would try to say, well, this is what you have to learn. You have to learn how to play bebop or something. And, that wasn't speaking to me as a need at the time.
So really your creative energies were within the enclave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and talk about that. I mean, talk about the song, how you would make songs up, or were you guys playing all original stuff at that time? When you talk
at the University of Miami.
Not the instructors, but when you got into that sort of community, paint that picture.
Well, it was like a thing where you would do gigs. I remember doing gigs at the student union with Pat Metheny, and he would teach us a tune really quick, and it was that kind of thing. And I really didn't like my teachers there, but I felt like the teachers weren't part of the scene at all.
It's very stodgy.
Well, they were honestly bad teachers because I learned from them how not to teach. It was all the things that I reacted poorly to that I said, I'm never going to do that with a student because it's just kind of dumb. You kind of, to impose like a stylistic preference on somebody is dumb. You try to give them tools and encourage them to do what is their natural thing. That's all people can really do. But, at some point you have to impart some knowledge, but I think that the knowledge has to be not stylistically biased. It has to be stuff that they can use to create whatever they want to, So,
do you find that when students today, they, I talk to the horn players, for instance, and they'll talk about wanting to sound like Coltrane or wanting to sound like a certain type of person, as opposed to developing their own original sound. Is it harder today to create that original sound because there's just so much out there to try to comp?
Well, I think generally it gets more and more difficult to, to stand on the shoulders of the people that went before. Because, to me, a lot of people now sound like Mike Brecker, who to me was the evolution of Coltrane for our generation of involving, R&B into the thing. And
Indian, there was a lot of Middle Eastern or Indian raga that Coltrane he was kind of at the forefront of that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, with Michael Brecker, he added another layer on it that made it more, contemporary for saxophonists today. And, I don't hear anybody surpassing that yet. So it's a very high thing. Or Jaco. Nobody's playing better than Jaco. So people have a lot to, you have to kind of get to some kind of high level and surpass that. Man, that's hard.
Yeah, it is. That's a very good point.
Yeah, it's not easy to get your... And I think the last 15 years or so, jazz has been in a terrible situation that a lot of the people that got notoriety were people that kind of ignored the progression of people like Mike Brecker or Pat Metheny, and they said, we're going to look back to Duke Ellington and the more people from like the 50s and 60s, and they skipped a whole chain of development, of okay, well, that's very good. And for a while I would listen to people on the radio and I go, now is that some old guy or is it some young guy that sounds like what generation are they from? And to me, that's very negative, and it's very antithetical to how jazz progresses, because you can't do that. You can't skip influences that came, and say, well, I'm just going to go back to this and kind of imitate it. Because, I was lucky to grow up with Pat Metheny, who was influenced by Wes and Pat Martino and Jim Hall, but he completely molded that into a sound that was his. And I hear very little of that. Pat and John Scofield and Mike Stern progressed the picture deeply, like a lot. And the guys today, I think, are taking it like 5 or 10 yards further. But there's a whole football field that you got to kind of cover to make a touchdown, and I don't hear it. I don't want to sound like a stodgy old guy that says, like in my day. But I think realistically, I don't hear the progression as deep as I think it should be. Although I think
could the
people
progression.
are starting.
This is going out on a limb here, but could there was an intensity to the music, whether it's the work you did with Pat Metheny or
Well,
Pat
that's
Martino.
something. No,
Let me get my question here. The question is, because of the digital age that we live in now, a lot of people are sort of they can create all these sounds and then they can work on their own instrumentation, as opposed to working within a group, and therefore it creates the love, because the more and more that's what it's about. It's about the love, man.
Well, also Pat Metheny said to me once, he said, in the old days, he was talking about a record that, Eric Kloss, we talked about him, right? That he did records, and with Pat, and Jack DeJohnette and Chick, and he said, in those days when they made a record, those guys, he said, they were like approaching it like, this is going to be a hit record. Like, we're going to play passionately, and everybody's going to love this, and we're going to play with all our heart and soul. And, I have a sense that there was more of that, like, drive and determination. But, it was also in rock, too. I mean, there hasn't been, the same kind of development in rock by a long shot, from the Stones or the Beatles or Led Zeppelin. That was some, like, passionate, crazy, hard driving stuff that had a lot of magic that, I watch what's happening today and I go, it's nowhere. In classical music and in rock and jazz, everybody needs, whatever went off the track, has to seriously get realigned, because it's really not. I feel honestly lucky that I've met Esperanza Spalding, who I think is the start of a generation that's kind of like, I'm doing my own thing, I'm passionate, I feel there are some people out there like her that will and can have the intensity to pick up for what wasn't progressing, and like, just, all right, we're gonna knock it up a bunch of notches now.
That was pretty heavy, actually. We're talking to Gil Goldstein, legendary figure in jazz, accordionist and pianist, and talk a little bit about Esperanza Spalding a little bit. She won an award recently for I know George Duke mentioned her as well, and he spouted the same thing you did, sort of this idea of I'm going to blaze my own path. Can you talk a little bit about your involvement with her?
Okay, well, about 2 years ago, I met her kind of coincidentally, that some friend of mine was interested in doing a film, and they asked me to see if I could get them in touch with her. And I didn't know her, and I unfortunately was not familiar with the record that she did that was kind of a hit record called Esperanza that came out about 3 years ago. And I went to see her gig, and I was very impressed with her, and it turned out she was kind of a fan of my work with Mike Brecker and with Joe Lovano. She had heard me play accordion with Joe, and she had started putting she was going to put 2 records together, one called Chamber Music Society and one called Radio Music Society. And she wanted to put them out together as one CD, as a double CD. But she started working with me, and she had a couple false starts on the radio music project. And so she started working with me on the chamber music project. But she's also an arranger, but she was looking to me for some insight and to make sure that the arrangements were going to fly. And, when I first looked at it, I said, gee, I don't know if there's much that I can do. But once I started getting a little deeper into it, I said, oh yeah, I would do this, I mean, every arranger, if they look at somebody else's arrangement, eventually will go, oh, I might have done that here. But she took it to heart and let me have my way with a couple of the arrangements. And then, then I would start an arrangement, and I said, well, let's see how she's going to react. And she said, well, I like the landscape of it. And I said, she doesn't buy it lock, stock, and barrel. And so we would go through the arrangement, and she would say, but how about if this was like this? I said, okay, that could work, but how about this and that? So we had
It's a dialogue.
A dialogue, yeah. And I think it worked out good, and we did the Chamber Music Society record. And so far, it is, it's like one of the top-selling jazz records. It's, sold a lot of records all over the world. She's traveling, and, it just keeps selling. And then she won the Best New Artist last year at the Grammys, which is generally a pop award. And she beat Justin Bieber. And, like the Grammys, it's kind of, for lack of a better word, bull. I'll leave off the last word. Because there's always a political and a thing to it. So what happened with her was, Justin Bieber and Florence and the Machine, they all split their votes. And she got all the jazz and classical votes from the Academy. And in reality, though, she was the best new artist in the sense that she's the best musician of them. She's the more competent. She can sing and play the bass at the same time. She can arrange and compose music kind of at a pretty high level. I mean, I don't know if you can say that, that somebody is better than somebody else in music, because in the end, it's who gets the most people that they communicate with. And if you have screaming fans, well, obviously they're doing something right. But at some point, you like to think there's some kind of quantitative thing that says, this is quantitatively better. It's like, music is a science as much as it is an art. But at the same time, it has to be progressed. Music can't stagnate in its development, or we end up with a dead shark on our hands. It kind of everybody has to be part of the research and development of the music, and I just don't hear it a lot of times in the in a lot of the jazz, a lot of the pop and rock and rap music, and a lot of the new classical music. It's just not,
It's not evolving.
It's not evolving. People are like rehashing the old, and they're not, and you just don't feel the spark that makes something, it's everybody's responsibility, and I'm just as guilty as the next person of not creating the perfect statement. And there's always people that'll criticize everybody, and people go out there on a limb, and there's people that go out on a limb and take chances. The person that comes to mind is Pat Metheny, because he does all the wackiest stuff in the world, plays with robots, but he's trying to get out there and, he's trying to develop something. I want to try to break some eggs here, and I think that's a risky business, but, thank God there's people that are out there doing that.
It seemed it seems to me that, like you were talking about this, it was just a treasure trove of whatever you want to call it. Eccentrics, prodigies, collaborations that were going on in this early '70s time. You in South Beach, you had guys like Barry Miles and Eric Kloss and Pat Martino, and then this whole black community as well, Richard Davis and Booker Irvin and Billy Hart. And that's sort of the you can see through the visual art and obviously through the music itself. It was non-judgmental. I guess that's the only way I can say it. And there's something now where I actually have somewhat of a different take on what you said before. Someone was saying, I was an earlier interview I had with a bass player, Henry Franklin, when he was part of a group that did an album for Milestone back in the early '70s, and he said Orrin Keepnews, who was the producer out there. Right. Okay, I said, you guys were the clip I played for him. It was like really kind of a funky little clip, and everybody was listening to each other, and I was talking about the sharing and the listening, and he said I got to give a lot of credit to Orrin Keepnews because he said this is so and so's date. It's not about a hit. Just go in, do it. I trust you guys. You guys are musicians. You know what you're doing, and they just went. So there wasn't like this sort of like pressure to try to pull something off that that would just come naturally. How much were you involved in sort of what kind of environment do you do better in? One where there's clearly set out structure, or one where it's like, guys, have at it, free flow, let's go.
Well, you're kind of talking about the thing of producing, which, I started off when I started making records. I mean, Pat will tell you this. We didn't have a producer on those early records that really helped that much. We kind of...
In some ways, that was good, though.
It was kind of good, but, to me, producing is almost a superfluous kind of thing, because in the end, like arranging in a way, the best arranging is a little bit invisible, and so is the best producing, that everybody feels, like they have the freedom to do their thing. A producer can't be dogmatic, but then again, you don't want somebody that doesn't understand what you're doing and can't give you some feedback. So I think that's what you're talking about. I've never really been in a position where a producer tried to impose his or her will on the players. So I don't really know what that is, but I've seen not good producing where it was not productive and didn't help determine a happier ending to the situation, or when a problem occurs that they can kind of troubleshoot and go, guys, hold on a second. This is kind of banging into the wall. Try to do this. But to me, there's very rarely there can be a producer that is not also like a player and a musician on some level. There's no such thing as that. And I think a lot of people take the producer credit and are a little bit irresponsible with it,
How do you try to balance it as a producer when you do production? I mean, you when you see somebody like you said, when they're coming to loggerheads or they're banging into the wall, then you gotta
and I say, hold on a second,
and you're like not now, buddy, not now.
Because I was just producing a record in Poland with a very good singer named Anna Maria Jopek, and it was a little bit of a touchy situation because it's her regular group, so they have kind of a chemistry, and it was me that was the arranger and producer, and Gonzalo Rubalcaba that played piano. So, everybody was a little kid glove with Gonzalo because he's a very great and talented artist, so you kind of wanted to leave space and is Gonzalo happy and is everything cool. But I had to kind of leave it clear for Gonzalo to shine and for the group to not get bent out of shape. But there was one song that was happening without Gonzalo and without me playing, and they just were not, no one was becoming like a force without me and Gonzalo there. They were like, who do we follow? And so nobody did anything. So it'd be like, it was like going to die any second.
The little engine that couldn't get up.
It was like the little engine that could. I said, guys, I said, I'm going to have to actually conduct.
Right.
And so I went, and I said, when this section's coming, you really have to start you have to see where it's going to go to. And so as it was slow, maybe I can even find it.
Let's get a clip.
We can do it like an actual clip here. And
you're going to get real audio here of what he's talking about.
Audio.
Gil has found his way into the digital age quite well, actually. Working on his Mac.
The Macker.
Long gone are the days of the analog and the reel-to-reels.
All right, so here's one of these is the song.
Let's take one of the unconfident ones that you had to conduct.
Well, I'm gonna find that one. I don't know the name. Oh, here it is. Yeah. I'm good. I'm pretty lucky. So it starts off like this. So I'll give you a quick tour.
Yeah, definitely.
So they started. It's like in this groove. 1, 2, 3. Here where it goes into. But you see, it has to kind of, and it can seem like an eternity if things are like moving slow, and that's a production thing. And we had that with with every record I've ever worked on. It's kind of finding a right tempo and how the song can feel like a organic entity. And a lot of times the players don't take the initiative.
The question I have for you is it to be in a leadership position? I mean, is it a daunting task? Because like what I caught on to before was the idea of sort of the headless horseman idea. When I forgot the guy's name, the guy who was being treated with kid gloves.
Oh, Gonzalo.
Gonzalo and you, when you guys were both not playing, all of a sudden everybody else was kind of like,
right.
Is that something like you can feel? Can you close your eyes and just feel it because of the music, or do people sort of all of a sudden you're like, boy, they're just like chickens with their heads cut off?
Well, I think in order to be a good musician in these days, everybody kind of has to take their heads out of the music and out of the sand and try to visualize a big context for things. And a lot of times people don't do that. That's kind of an accompaniment art that you're not only thinking of your little part you're playing, but you're thinking of the whole picture. And not a lot of people do that.
The one thing I'm fascinated about, and I'm hoping you can talk about it a little bit, the idea that you were already, you had already made a couple of albums, and you had played with a lot of tremendous guys, and then in 1982 you met Gil Evans.
Right.
And you said it was a mind-blowing experience. Right. And because he just kind of turned your brain inside out, the way to look at can you talk about what specifically, like if maybe a specific song or a type of thing or type of idiom or whatever he did that kind of turned you around?
Well, you just knew from Gil that he was the kind of person that was, he said it to me very clearly one day. He said, accompaniment, that's a lost art, and he kind of realized that, most guys are getting out there and taking a solo and kind of, splooging all over the place. You can say that on the radio.
Dude, I love that line.
You know, but I mean, they're not thinking of like, you know, of a whole, like, what story am I telling? How am I fitting together? You know, there's not an accompanimental spirit, and I think a lot of times that's what's required. So when I met somebody like Gil Evans, and then I started to get deeper into what he actually did for Miles, even in the records that he wasn't so credited, like Fees of Kilimanjaro, that he just kind of facilitated the kind of loose kind of vibe that was still, you know, had that kind of musical thing that, you know, Miles had, and he might not have had without Gil. You know, Gil was somebody that said, yeah, you know, that's okay, go for it. You know, he kind of like, go ahead, Miles. He gave him kind of carte blanche to keep it a little bit loose, and no, that's okay. You know, Gil was not a uptight guy in any sense, and most of, I think, the arrangers that follow Gil and that kind of are quoted as like being the new Gil Evans are these very strict kind of, that is to me the antithesis of Gil Evans. Gil Evans was the loosest guy on the planet, even though his arrangements were perfectly crafted, better than anybody that's writing today for a fact, you know, but he still didn't want them to be played preciously, and, you know, he wanted you to bring stuff to the arrangement, and even though they were well crafted, he wanted the kind of, you know, overall view of what he could create from it and what he wanted the players to do. One quick other story.
Yeah.
I was playing a thing with Gil Evans once. We did a remake of a Helen Merrill record that he had done.
Oh, yeah, great singer.
Yeah, do you know the record? He did a record with her called Dream of You.
I don't know that
It was done like in 1956, before Gil did the stuff with Miles, or maybe 53. I don't know what the real year was on that. But I think Helen told me it was the first record that he arranged the whole record of. You know, he would do like some tracks for Claude Thornhill or some tracks for Miles on Birth of the Cool, but it was 2 tracks and then 2, you know, he didn't do arranged by Gil Evans, the whole record. So she had to talk the record company into, I want to hire Gil Evans, and he did a record, a beautiful record called Dream of You, and they did standards incredibly arranged by Gil Evans. So years later, they wanted Gil and Helen to do another record. But Gil wasn't in the mood to redo a whole nother record at that point. He was maybe 73. And so he said, why don't we just remake the other one and do like a new version? But somebody transcribed the music. They didn't find it at the time. And it was really stiffly transcribed, and people were playing it in a modern way that was not the old thing. And it was collapsing before your very eyes, you know. And I went, wow, I want to see how Gil reacts to this, because is he going to get uptight and go like, hey, come on, like, you know. And but he very calmly said, hey, guys, please contribute here, you know, and your contributions will be appreciated. So he knew that everybody had to start looking at the whole picture, look at your part, but don't look at it too carefully. Know what it's supposed to be and bring a little to it and contribute. You know, it's not going to get off the ground if you keep it like da 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 da. So these guys were laughing when I came to Poland, because, you know, I made some notes for them to play. But I didn't want them to play just that. I said this is kind of a starting point for the guitar player and the bass, and they started to play do 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 do
Don't be so square, right?
No, but they just took it totally literally.
Right.
And I said, hey, you know what, guys? Don't play what's on the paper. And they thought that was so funny.
Right.
Because they said, but you wrote it. I said, yeah, I wrote it, but I just meant for you to get the basic idea.
No, but I just want to add that we have become, in many ways, this newer generation, my generation, much more linear.
Yeah.
Much more linear. Because you would look at something like that and say, oh, yeah.
This is the track that I wrote, kind of a Gil Evans track. But they had to contribute to make it.
What's the name of this song?
Uvož mamo.
I like that additional percussion in the background too.
But people have to contribute this stuff to make it happen. So,
well, I think also the reality is having an early '70s brain like Gil Goldstein in a recording session with contemporary players must help a little bit. Come on, you can say yes. The idea of saying to them, guys, don't take it so literally.
Yeah,
that's the thing, man. Yeah. I mean, that's what I see. There's no fast and loose because you know what? And I keep saying this, Gil, Wrapped in a Cloud, okay? Back then, now I don't know how many copies you sold of that album per se, but the reality...
35 million.
35 million copies of Wrapped in a Cloud. I bought this in Phoenix, Arizona, so it's made its way across the country and probably
Thank God.
Into the Japanese markets too. But the reality is we live in a society today, not only is it linear, it's also what is quantifiable versus what is unquantifiable. If it's unquantifiable, then it must not be worth anything. Okay? If it's quantifiable and it makes profit, then it's good. And that's sort of what that's more on a political level when you start seeing, politicians want to slice things off, no raising taxes, not allowing things to grow. It's sort of like saying, okay, if you make a profit, it's worthy. But you know what? If you, in theory, when I was at Boston University, I went through many, many emotional times. I had some very hard times, some depression. I could honestly come home from a hard day of school and put that on and relax to it. And that's, that is unquantifiable. Do you know what I'm trying to say? You can't put a dollar figure on that.
I think that's a good way to look at it. That there are certain things, I went through my whole college career thinking, I'm sure there's something that I must be able to learn that will help me make good music. And I didn't realize through my college career that it was actually intuition and just using your instinct that is the real answer, And I was kind of thinking, I was brainwashed into a kind of a quantifiable thing. Well, how do you, and I don't regret that I did that because it made me learn a lot of stuff, and I feel very equipped to jump off the diving board now and go, hey, I can be intuitive. Herbie Hancock when we did Mike Brecker's, one of his records that Herbie was on it, Herbie said to me, sometimes when I play an F minor chord now, I just let my hands fall. But I knew he didn't mean that. He just meant I like to be as free as I can be, and maybe something accidentally is going to happen, and, but Herbie knows every possible voicing of an F minor. So now he can get unquantifiable and kind of just, throw the dice and go, hey, and if it wasn't exactly the throw he wanted, he can pull it to another zone. But, I think that'll be the, we have to be, we have to know the elements of music that we're working with. But if we're not instinctive and intuitive, it's going to die. Our whole art is going to die.
So let's talk a little bit about an album that has had a profound impact on me, which is "We'll Be Together Again." How did it come about? How did you meet Pat, and how did that record come to be?
Well, I met Pat was through Jaco Pastorius, who I met when I was a student at the University of Miami, and he was living in Miami at the time. And it was before Weather Report, and he was just an overconfident, avatar at the time. He just was totally tuned in.
Jaco was.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, man, this is some advanced stuff I've walked into here, So I pretty much remember every word that Jaco ever said to me, because everything was kind of tinged with, like, some kind of intelligent, like, heavily information-packed stuff,
Nothing was ever one sentence. It was always...
Nothing was, just, like, boring,
Yeah, right.
He would say stuff with, like, I literally remember probably 95% of the stuff that he said to me, like the actual lines. I can almost kind of hear him saying it. So I went up to Boston, Berkeley, because Pat had asked me maybe if I wanted to teach there, and I had a little interview with Gary Burton. And at that week, Pat was doing a gig with Jaco in a club there. And then we drove back to New York after that, and I had a cousin that lived in the Village. And I said, hey, I got a place where you can crash if you want to hang in New York. Because he said, yeah, I want to start coming to New York and meeting some people. So I said...
you talking about Jaco or...
Jaco,
okay, yeah. Right.
So Jaco came back to New York with me, and he said, Jaco was originally from Philadelphia, and somehow he met Pat, and so he went and played with Pat. So he said, hey man, you want to play with Pat Martino? And I went, yeah. He said, well, here's his number, call him up. And from my cousin's kitchen, I said, called up Pat, and I was nervous as hell, because it was, I never really applied for a job with anybody in the music business. I kind of always got jobs kind of word of mouth. And in a way, that was kind of word of mouth, because I guess Jaco thought, maybe you should play with Pat, because I guess he thought Pat would think that he wouldn't give me his number unless he thought I was going to play with him. I just thought of that now. And Pat said, so I said, hey, my name's Gil, and Jaco gave me your number, and I'd like to get together and play sometime. And I remember what Pat said, because Pat, I remember most of what he said to me too. And he said, are you sure, man? Because he could kind of tell that I was a little nervous. And
just through the phone.
Just through the phone, So he was like, are you sure? And I went, yeah, I'm sure. I am sure. And so I went to Philly. I don't remember when. Maybe it was a couple weeks later.
Okay.
And I always pictured Pat like this big burly guy that slept on the top level of a bunk bed. I don't know why. That was my, and he would just kind of like be really tough, and he was a tough guy, and he would smoke, and he would throw the cigarette on the ground.
Right.
I don't know why. I just pictured him as a big, burly...
And there were no Google images back then. So
there was no Google images. The only image I saw of him was on the cover of The Visit, and it was a kind of a very close-up picture. And I pictured him a big guy,
Right. Oh, yeah, that tribute to West, that was The Visit.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
And he looked big.
He did. He looked...
So anyway,
yeah.
I went to his house on Hamilton Street in Philadelphia, and he answered the door, and he was like a wisp of a guy, And so right away, we kind of like hit it off. I said, it's like when I played at the Blue Note with Pat about 5 years ago, and Joe Pesci came into the dressing room, because he's a friend of Pat's, and he's also a singer. And Joe Pesci came in, and he goes to me, he goes, hey, how you doing? He goes, I like you. You're short. And that's kind of how I felt about Pat. I felt like kind of relieved that we were kind of the same size, as I'm kind of short too. And I said, this is going to be a good thing. And Pat was so warm and open when I first met him. I kind of lost all my kind of fear of, kind of meeting him, and I thought, hey, this could be a good collaboration. And Jaco also said to me, he says, man, if you go to Pat's, write a tune for him, something that's challenging, that shows him that, you got some information.
You got gravitas.
You got some gravitas. So I wrote this tune, Open Road, and I played it for Pat the first day I was with him there in Philly, and he goes, I like that tune,
Do 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 do.
Another one, yeah, I'm not plugged in.
Well, let's go over there and play it. Can we play it over on the old one?
I can plug it in.
All right.
I ain't got no cord. I left it in the thing. Yeah.
Well, let's play it on that one.
I can't. Well, you'll play it on the radio show.
Yeah, no. So yeah, that was it.
We went on to record that.
Right.
So and we just started playing together, and we did a bunch of gigs together in a band, and then after about a year, he signed a deal with Warner Brothers Records, and we were about to make the record Starbright, but he still had to do 2 records for
Muse,
yeah. So we did the Exit, and We'll Be Together Again, and in about 3 weeks, I had played on 3 records. So, it was kind of my whole shoot into, recording. And it was a very good way into recording because it was very natural. And again, like the kind of Gil Evans and Miles thing, it was pretty loose. It was not like in any way restricted or tight, and, it was just kind of a natural thing, and I kind of could express the way I felt about playing with Pat, which was not especially in a duet situation because there was no distractions. It was just me and Pat, and I could just totally relate to him, and then playing with Billy Hart and Richard Davis, that was the best band I had ever played with Pat or in any other situation. So, it was just an instant kick up, and I said, I just have to make the leap from this ring of the molecule to this leap, because, I had never quite made the leap, really, because, either the drummer was lousy in a band and I couldn't quite, get myself expressed, or I couldn't, do what I wanted to do. But here everybody was totally listening and open and professional, so I felt like, hey, I did pretty good, for my first record dates. And Pat was always good on records, so it was kind of, him just doing his normal, regular, good thing, and Richard Davis being supportive, and Billy Hart being supportive. So I could kind of flow into it. And in a funny way, I felt in a little way that I was a little bit producing with Pat on Starbright, because the producer that we had, even if he's listening to this, he probably will admit it, was not really aware of what we needed to get the music together. So I would kind of...
It was kind of a fusion? Was that the way, how you describe it?
It was a lot of different styles that Pat had written. Because, I honestly still think that Pat has some of his best music in a state of waiting. Like the music that we were talking about doing some other projects with orchestra. He has some great pieces that he's never had the opportunity to vitalize. And these were all pieces that Pat had in different, with synth demos and different versions that we had to figure out a way to record. So, we kind of, in a way, it was a little bit of a production thing. I wrote horn charts for one thing. It was some of my first arrangements that I had ever written. I would kind of coach Will Lee how to play bass on certain things to, get him through the music. And, I think it was just, I felt like I had a lot of responsibilities that, as I look back on it, made me feel a little bit like a producer, even though I wasn't credited, and I shouldn't have been credited because it wasn't really my job. But I felt that I was getting a very good on-the-job training.
You were getting your feet wet,
Yeah.
and Pat allowed you to do that.
He was totally open to letting me do it, and I was doing it in a way to be helpful to the process. You know, there's nothing that I hate more in this record business is somebody that says they're an arranger or a producer, and they really are not. You know, and there's a lot of people that are, I don't want to use the word charlatan, but in the end, they don't really help the final picture, you know, and they take credit for something that they shouldn't. And a lot of times people get hired for things and don't really do their job, you know, and they still get credited as something, and they can kind of muddle on and even get hired for other jobs. But I hate when I see that.
Did you, and that's sort of what, it's interesting because you talked about you didn't really have much of a producer for We'll Be Together Again. You actually, if memory serves, a lot of the rehearsals or the tune-ups you guys did were actually in Pat's house for that session.
We did some, you know, we had played a little bit together in duet, and it was generally with an electric piano because that's what he had in his house. So when we started to play together, there was a piano at the studio. It was not a great piano, and, you know, it was not a great thing. I'll tell the story, which was that we started to play one tune together. And, you know, to me, Jim Hall and Bill Evans kind of nailed the art of duet, you know, playing together. But that was the sound of an acoustic piano and electric guitar. And it's a little bit hard to get away from Jim and Bill because they had that sound with that. And I couldn't imagine another way to play the piano besides kind of a Bill Evans way, which is the way everybody plays when they play with Jim duet. If they're playing piano, it's like a Bill Evans style. You cannot get around it almost, you know. Michel Petrucciani did it. I recorded with Jim after I played with Pat, and I couldn't help but reference Bill Evans. There's no way. Larry Goldings did it when he recorded with Jim on piano. You cannot do it. It's like a gravity. You know, you can't avoid
So
it.
you and Pat were like, let's just do the electric piano.
Well, and Pat actually said to me, he said, Gil, you know, you're playing a lot like Bill Evans, and it's not going to be a great thing for your career if you sound that much like Bill Evans. And the piano was also bad, so I said, you know what, let me just try. Or he said, just get on the electric piano. And as soon as I got on the electric piano, I went, oh yeah, that's the way I think of playing with Pat, because we used to play like that. But it was one of those things that you kind of have to be awake, because you can, you know, that might have been a thing that a producer might have said. But it came very naturally from him and from me, and we just naturally knew that was the right answer. And then we could kind of continued, you know, we didn't even think of the piano anymore after that. So, you know, that was kind of how it started. And we pretty much recorded the record. One day we did a bunch of tunes. We had a couple days off for some reason, and then we recorded again another day, and that was it. You know, the record was done, you know. And
Well, my wife has been patiently waiting here for several hours. I was invited out. Gil graciously invited me out for July 4th holiday spectacular, and we had a chance to sit down, and I'm really happy with this product, and I hope we can do it again. It was really a lot of fun, and I just hope that you can continue educating people out there about your views about how, in many ways, how modern musicians can be a little more fluid and a little more flexible and a little more open-minded, so we can evolve, music can evolve. So I really appreciate your time, Gil.
all right. And who listens to your program the most? What do you say? What would
The Japanese.
In Japan?
I'd say that when I look at the downloading statistics, most of them are from Europe and Japan.
Really?
The appreciation level there is extremely high. Not to bash my loyal fan base on KJLL. I'm not doing that. But that's where it is. Germany, Italy, and Japan.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say, too, that I'm still very proud of a book that I wrote called The Jazz Composer's Companion that's produced by Advanced Music that has pretty much everything I know about the way music works scientifically.
And you had each artist talk, right? I mean,
yeah.
No, I have that book.
Oh, yeah,
Eric Kloss is in there,
yeah.
and Joanne Bracchi. Who else is in that? So many great guys in that.
Bill Evans.
Yeah. Well, Gil, thank you, my friend. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Jake.